Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the Oregon Coast Online Artist Talk Series. My name is Tom Webb. I'm the director of the Newport Visual Arts Center for the Oregon Coast Council for the Arts. Our focus today is on Anna Fidler's current and new exhibit at the Newport Visual Arts Center, Incessant Pulse of the Future, in our upstairs gallery, which features large-scale and small-scale works of geographic forms with gouache and flash on handmade paper grids. I am broadcasting from the Runyan Gallery at the Visual Arts Center, and I am pleased to be joined by Anna Fidler in her studio in Corvallis and Holly Andres from her studio in Portland. Welcome, Anna and Holly.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this exhibition at the Newport Visual Arts Center. Thank you so much for setting this up. And it is also really a delight to have this interview with my longtime friend, Holly Andres.
Likewise, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to chat with Anna, and I'm so excited to talk about art for the next several minutes. Two of my favorite things.
And cats.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. This is a relatively new format for us, artists talking to artists, and so we're again excited to have both of you and appreciate you taking the time out to be with us. To give you a little bit more background, Anna's exhibit, Incessant Pulse of the Future, will be on display here at the Visual Arts Center in Nye Beach in Newport through May 29th. Given certain COVID restrictions, we are open on Wednesdays and Saturdays from noon to 4 p.m. We hope to open up more in the future, but for now, that's our schedule. The exhibit is being co-presented by the Charles A. Hartman Fine Art Gallery in Portland. I'd also like to mention that there's an online component to the exhibit, which you should be able to find at www.coastarts.org, which will have select pieces from the in-person show, which will be for sale. This is a discussion format between Holly and Anna. I am going to introduce them, and then I'm going to bow out of the discussion and let them move forward. I want to thank the Oregon Coast Council for the Arts for helping us present this. You can visit coastarts.org to learn more about OCCA and to lend your support. So let me now introduce Holly and Anna, and we're two very distinguished artists here today. Holly is a fine art and commercial photographer known for her stylized cinematic scenarios, often inspired by her own childhood experiences. Her work has appeared in galleries and museums from Barcelona, Istanbul, and Bogota to New York, San Francisco, Atlanta, and with viewers drawn to her often dark and mysterious or bright and witty photographs. Holly regularly photographs editorial assignments for many prestigious publications, including the New York Times Magazine, Time, The New Yorker, the California Sunday Magazine, while her fine art has been featured in Art in America, Art Forum, Exit Magazine, Art News. Oh boy, the list goes on and on. Visit Holly's website to learn even more. Welcome, Holly. Anna Fidler received her MFA from Portland State University in 2005 and her BFA from Western Michigan University in 1995. She's had solo exhibitions at the Boise Art Museum, Apex at the Portland Art Museum, the Johansson Project in Oakland, Wyden and Kennedy, and Distracta in Portland, among many other locations, such as the Everhart Museum of Natural History, Science and Art at the University of Southern California, and the Tacoma Art Museum. In 2020, she was included in the group show Metamorphosis, Visualizing the Music of Paul Hindemith at the Jordan Snitcher Museum of Art in Eugene. And I should also mention that Anna is on full-time staff in the art department at the at Oregon State University in Corvallis. So again, Holly and Anna, take it away.
Thanks again, Tom, for the introductions. So, Holly, I do have some images I can present that introduce the viewer to the exhibition that I'm having currently at the Newport Visual Arts Center. And we can talk about them. We can talk about other things. We'll just use it as kind of a visual point of interest for those watching. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll take a look at that. Okay. So these are installation images of the work that is currently up right now at the Newport Visual Arts Center from my exhibition, Incessant Pulse of the Future. And Holly, you can jump in at any point.
Yeah, maybe if you just want to cycle through them, the kind of first round, just to give the viewers exposure to what you're working on right now. But I want to kick off our conversation with a big question. And basically, I want to know how you've been doing this last year. And, you know, we're 13 months into a global that none of us could have ever imagined would happen in our lifetime. And I guess I want to know how, I'm curious as a fellow artist to hear from you how this experience has impacted your sense of self as an artist, your own studio practice, your creativity, your concepts, all the big stuff.
All right, thanks. What a great question to kick it off with. So pandemic life has been really interesting for me as an artist because I've found it to be a time of great production in the studio. I've rarely had as much time to make and create new works as I have over the pandemic because of the limitations that we all have on going out, teaching in person, things like that. So I've found it actually extremely productive to retreat to the studio. And the vast majority of the work that you're seeing in this exhibition was made during the pandemic. You know, I would say the pandemic has not been easy in many regards for me psychologically. So a lot of these works deal with topics that I really hadn't explored very thoroughly before, like anxiety, kind of a yearning to get back out into the public, kind of a feeling of loss. They don't look like it. There's this, to me at least, this is confluence of angels. There's kind of a hopefulness in this work that I think also is tied to this state of being during a time of enclosure. So I also started making pieces I never had dreamed of making on cardboard, a series of masks. We're thinking about masks worn during a pandemic, of course, to cover our mouths and noses, but I started thinking about other kinds of masks, like this weeping willow tree mask, or this moon mask, which actually is reversible. If you turn it around, there's a sun. So kind of looking at both sides. So how am I doing during the pandemic? I'm productive, but contemplative, I think. Does that answer?
Yeah, that sounds great. Your work has one of the unifying threads through all of your work that I've observed is that it's always, I feel like you've always been very laborious in your process. There's this sort of reverence for almost like tedium. And I wonder, I'm curious about if you find that you kind of transition into some sort of a trance-like, or like what sort of psychological space are you in when you're making this work?
Okay, thank you for asking that. So this actually enables me to talk about the grids that I'm using in this work. If you look closely, we'll look at this piece, Confluence of Angels. If you look closely at it, you can see a grid. It's a handmade grid, meaning I use large rulers and pencils and make my own grid paper. So in doing so, I enter a different kind of state of making and existing, really. It's a meditative state, the state of slowness and stillness, and it's kind of almost mathematical state too, where I'm measuring and thinking about small spatial parts. So in beginning a piece, all of the works that you're seeing here, except for the cardboard pieces, these pieces here where you can really see the grids, they begin with the grid. And so the meditative state is interesting. It's new to me because even though my work historically has been very labor intense, a lot of repetition, whether it's cutting with scissors or now gridding, has been kind of the backbone of my work. But this enters a new phase for me in that I can't be interrupted. I have to have silence when I'm working frequently. I used to listen to music all the time in the studio, but there's this silence that happens, especially in making pieces like this one right here, which is a piece that was a catalyst. It's called Feeling of Unexpected Rain. And this piece and several others in the exam, and I'm going to use my arrow to point out the shape that's a little bit like a heart. And you can see it in this piece and several of the other pieces in the exhibition. And if anyone has used a Ouija board before, you place the planchette on top of a surface and then place your fingers on top of the planchette and let it move around until it usually would come across a letter or a number to spell out a word. And instead of words, I'm dealing with points on a grid. And so I've been thinking back to the spiritualists of the 19th century and early 20th century, where people would get together and use these planchettes and Ouija boards, talking boards, to communicate with the dead. And us living in a pandemic has kind of made me think about the spiritualists and using something like a planchette to actually help move my hand along the grid until I stop at a certain point. Like I'll point out, finding these points and then link them together with lines. So my mindset in the pandemic is going back to the spiritualists and thinking about kind of this act of conjuring and what's beyond my state of being. Is that?
That is so fascinating, Anna. Can we look through a couple other images? And if you have examples of borrowed symbols or even invented symbols that you may want to share, I would love to hear more about that.
Yes, I can do that. So just to point out another example of the planchette. So if you look closely again, you're going to see the outline of a heart shape right here. So it's yet another version of that. And let's see, I think I'll go backwards. This is an earlier piece. So I'm going to kind of, this might have been the first piece I made during the pandemic. And this is the title piece to the exhibition. This is called Incessant Pulse of the Future, which, just a side note, ties into my own personal state of being during this strange time. So here, this is actually a good installation view. that
Incessant pulse of the future is like the most beautiful and romantic way of describing generalized anxiety.
it is.
Right?
It is. I mean, the pulse just keeps going on and on until it doesn't. And that's the, I don't know, point where anxiety can rise, right? So yeah, so all of these pieces on this wall utilize that planchette. So you can kind of see where I'm pointing out those shapes. Holly, what was your question? I feel like I've kind of sidestepped it
I
a
was
little
just
bit.
so fascinated by the way that you described the planches, and I was just wondering if there were any other borrowed or invented symbols in some of the subsequent images that you may wanted to reveal to us.
Okay, so that's a great, I'm going to go to an image. Maybe we'll go this direction where maybe we can actually see some of the little invented symbols that we're talking about. So when I'm thinking about this meditative state that I described, you know, there's an act of direct painting that this is all about. And direct painting means with no preliminary thought. So whether it be a guidance from a planchette to find certain points on this plane, or whether it be invented symbols, which I think you can see, whether it's just simple circles, or I always think of these as like greater than or less than signs, like mathematical sometimes. But there's no direct meaning I don't know what these are. However, I do believe they mean something. So that means I am more of a conduit. I'm someone that a message passes through, and I'm enabled to utilize this kind of symbolic code as a way that maybe someone else can awaken to and understand. And this is not a new idea. This is something, once again, that the spiritualists were really interested in. And I feel like I'm just yet another person on a similar path, maybe 100 years later.
Do you think about some of the things that were happening socially and politically during the spiritualist movement that might relate to the way that you're revisiting those themes now?
Yes, I do. I think it's important to note that we're in a pandemic. We've been in a period of time of political unrest for some time. And if you go back to 1918, of course, we can reference the Spanish flu that overtook the world. We can also reference an era in which World War I was happening. And we can also look at the Roaring 20s, Dada, surrealism that was all kind of coming out of this time of unrest, of uncertainty. And I feel like we're mirroring that time. And in some ways, I feel like these ideas that are really resonating with me from the spiritualists, it's about this mirror that we're holding up right now to what was happening during that time.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, isn't it? How, I mean, it sounds so trite, but history repeating itself and how we have to relearn all of these things the hard way again.
Yes.
And again.
Agreed. Totally. And I feel like we're just immersed in it right now. And somehow I've been able to channel artwork. And that's my method of dealing with it.
I love that. Anna, can you talk a little bit about your color palette?
Yeah, sure. I'm really intuitive. So interestingly, I teach color theory. I've been teaching painting and design for quite some time now. So I think about how I teach color. And what's interesting is a lot of times, rather than gravitating to kind of color theory that people have thought about over time, and developed like their ideas and written books about. I am an intuitive colorist. So that means I feel a color. I feel like I'm needing to express something in particular. It could be an emotion. And then I see a color and I know it's the right color. And so I intuitively use that color. And this piece is a good example of that. This is called the Metamorphosis. And it's actually a piece that was responding to a work of music, a piece by Paul Hindemith, the Symphonic Metamorphosis. And I was commissioned by the Eugene Symphony to respond visually to a specific movement from the Metamorphosis. And this piece got me thinking about how to do that. How do you take sound and make it visual? And in terms of color, I feel like I could hear the sound from that particular movement, which is really repetitive. It's the second movement. And I responded to it in a way. I was a musician and I was in a band for maybe a decade in the 90s and early 2000s. And I always gravitated to repetition and sound. And I also gravitate to repetition in the visual form here. And sometimes sound to me has, I don't know, I don't see color in response, but I can feel it in some way. And I guess that's a form of synesthesia. I don't know if I would technically have that, but I do feel strongly about color and the necessity to use it in certain pieces.
And when you say you feel strongly about it, do you mean that it feels right? Or do you mean that you associate a particular emotion to that color? Like, can you talk a little bit? I mean, it sounds like it's kind of a nonverbal thing, but can you try to explain that process of feeling color?
I can. It's interesting. I'm reading this book lately that is called Thought Forms. It's by Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater. And it was written about 100 years ago during the spiritualist era. And thought forms are a way of visualizing, taking an idea, a concept, an emotion, something, and visualizing it through color and through form. And it's something I didn't know about this book until about 4 months ago. But it's something that I feel like I've been doing in terms of, let's see, I'm gonna look around to some different pieces and maybe we'll go this way. And think about the forms and the kind of colors in terms of a feeling. So this being Incessant Pulse of the Future, which I really knew this title was appropriate for the piece before it was even complete, right? So the title materialized out of kind of this process. And I began with color. Color and the thought of this pulse that's resonating and doesn't stop until it does. And this color of blue, this color of red, the primaries, they're kind of, and gold. There's this kind of deco look to this, but there's this kind of pure pivotal hue that I'm dealing with, the primaries. And to me, that incessant pulse is essential, right? It's a part of being. And to me, just like the primary colors, they're just simply what they are, just like a heartbeat is what they are. These kind of ideas came together at the same time. And it was that necessity of finding them and using them together that kind of made this piece what I think it is.
Interesting. So again, obviously your work is really process oriented. I'm curious if you have a experience where you have these kind of artistic epiphanal breakthroughs where you have an idea outside of the studio. And then the studio space is for execution, and or if I guess I just want to I want to get an understanding of how your artistic mind floats through the world and how the ideas come. Like, just for example, I find that for me, right when I'm on the cusp of falling asleep, it's a particularly fertile time for creativity. And I used to keep a journal, but now I just send or make audio recordings into my phone. But I'm wondering, and then for me, it's about preparing and ultimately executing that idea and what was in my mind's eye. So I'm wondering if there's certain things in your life outside of the studio that make you more receptive to being like a conduit to, creative ideas, or if all of this is happening in the studio, because it sounds like your process of direct painting is is where kind of the serendipity of, or the there, maybe there's not as much pre-visualization, or just tell me a little bit, fill in some of the gaps here. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? I know I'm not articulating myself very well, but
Totally get it.
okay.
So, I do a lot of driving. I drive back and forth from Portland and Corvallis frequently. And during those drives, I tend to either listen to extremely repetitive music with no lyrics or silence. And during those drives, I often get ideas. Ideas could be color. It could be like a piece that I'm obsessed with. Like in this show, there's a piece that is very orange. And that one is called The Thread from Your Head is Connected to the Sun. And on like a drive to Portland, let's say on a sunny afternoon, I might get an idea like that. Like, I want to make a piece that's about orange, and it has to be about, let's say, the way that I can imagine everyone in the entire world having this thread attached to their head that unites us to the sun. And I want to bring that together in one piece. And so that's the idea. Then all of a sudden I might make a recording of it also, like you do. So I can articulate my idea, or maybe I just commit it to memory. And then that gives me this motivation and drive to get into the studio in the first place, to get it there. The idea of working with the planchette on the grid and moving my hand around to locate points, that's an example of something that I could come across while driving. So for me, driving is actually productive. You're getting from one point to another, but you're also going into this state that's, you're very much aware of your surroundings, but your mind is able to go other places. So trying to think of other examples too. Some people, I can go on walks, and sometimes that happens. Just the repetition of walking and not talking to anyone, that can work as well. But I think that driving for me over the last 5 years at least has been pretty pivotal in terms of coming up with ideas, coming up with titles, bodies of work, etc.
That's so great that you have been able to, it's been able to provide that purpose for you, and that you're receptive and aware of it.
Yeah.
So then another process question, do you go through a series of sketches, or do you, this is the first time I learned about your process of direct painting. So I'm wondering, do you have the image of the design in your mind's eye and then you create it? Or is it a process that is always ever evolving when you're painting on the large scale surface?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say it is, again, purely intuitive. And I kind of have to go through this little dance in my mind of telling myself that no matter what I do is okay. Like there's no problem with making different shapes that relate to one another. They're always going to work. So that's a funny thing to say to yourself, like, this will not go wrong. Basically, the only thing that could go wrong is that you make the same piece twice, right? I don't want to do that. But to find something new, something that I hadn't discovered yet, a new technique, a new shape, a new interaction of color, that's what I'm going for. So in all the pieces here, I feel like I've learned something. It pushes me beyond, and there are no preliminary sketches. Sometimes I will point out, let's say these little pieces right here are a slightly different process where I've cut out shapes out of paper and then traced the shapes, mirrored them, and then traced them out on a grid. And I made these small pieces just to see what they would look like. And I did make very large pieces that don't look exactly like this. They're not the same shapes, but it's the idea. So I sometimes run a test, like right now in the studio.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, it's like a test. And so right now in the studio, I'll grab something. I know I'm small window, but this right here uses a black grid. So I paint the paper black first, and then I grid on top of black paper. And I have all sorts of other colors here. So it's an experiment on a small scale to see if I like it enough to take it to a large scale. So those are current experiments. I have a lot of them going on in the studio right now, which will probably make their way into large works, just like what you're seeing in this exhibition, probably over the spring and summer.
Well, I am so excited for you, and this conversation is really inspiring for me, because the last year I've pretty much only felt sane when I'm doing menial and manual labor, and have developed quite an affinity for landscaping. Let's see here. What could be another question? Okay, I'm curious about your transition from, at least work that I'm familiar with that is relatively recent and is relatively figurative, or portraiture. Great. And your transition to abstraction and non-objective imagery. Yeah. If you maybe want to address that a little bit.
Sure, I'd love to. So it's true. For probably about, 15 years, I was making what I call energy portraits, where I would take a photographic image of an actual person who once lived, usually someone, again, from probably about 100 years ago. I'd go to historical societies in my home state of Michigan, as well as Oregon, and find these individuals. Sometimes they're portraits, other times they might be just sitting, having a picnic at Oaks Bottom Park in Portland. And I would trace their form, and then I would build up their form by cutting many, many layers of paper until I made a dimensional form of a figure. And that I would call an energy portrait. So it wasn't about who the person was in terms of what they looked like, but it was more about the aura or who they were in terms of their being. And that's something that I still imagine I'll return to. It's a body of work that is not, and there's no end to it. I like the idea of non-traditional portraiture with energy. And I would do the same with trees, even landscapes. I would take pictures in my home state of Michigan, take pictures of important places in Oregon that I've experienced of trees. And I would use those trees as a template for an energy portrait of the trees. So energy has been something that I've been really interested in for over a decade. And then finally, around the time, maybe a couple years ago, I was invited by the Eugene Symphony and the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art in Eugene to work on that commission of Paul Hindemith's Symphonic Metamorphosis and respond to sound. And that was a real pivotal moment for me because I no longer felt any need to think about figures. Instead, my whole entire motivation went to this geometric look. And so, you know, I'm looking at the pieces in this exhibition. We can look at this middle piece right here, the Metamorphosis. And this is a really important piece because it allowed me to move beyond figuration and concentrate on energy itself. So just the idea of energy, feelings, thoughts, music, sound. And that it was a moment where I didn't need the figure anymore. I didn't need to make any image of a person to show this energy that I could experience. And so, though I say I might return at some point to the energy portrait of cutting multiple layers of paper and making silhouetted individuals, this is where my heart is right now. This geometric look that really is about pure energy itself.
That's so fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for all the questions. I know you have great questions.
Well, thank you. I mean, I've obviously been invested in your work as a fellow artist, but also, you know, because you're my dear friend and we went to graduate school together, and it's just been really wonderful and delightful to see the trajectory of your career and to see how your work, you continue to constantly push yourself, and I just have so much respect for you as an artist, Anna, and as a human.
Thank you so much, Holly. I feel the same exactly. I've been thinking about how we met in 2003 and our career trajectories have, you know, aligned, but our friendship is so deep and profound. It's rare to know someone in the way that I feel like I've known you over these years and shared so much. So it's just a pleasure to have you ask these questions that are so specific to my work. You know me well. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
Well, let me chime in and say thanks to the two of you as well. This has been a treat for us to have two such good both artistic cohorts and close friends share that experience. I want to really encourage people to come down to the Visual Arts Center on Wednesdays and Saturdays from noon to 4 p.m. Sorry about that.
They're calling off the hook.
And if you found this interview, you found it on YouTube Live, the Oregon Coast Council for the Arts channel. And I encourage you to watch a lot of the other artist talks that we've had. Our latest talk was with John Reisig of Portland, with Sean Healy of Portland, talking about John's show Concealment and Revelation. You know, follow us on Facebook, visit www.coastarts.org to sign on to all of our different e-newsletters, and we hope to stay connected. So again, thanks to the two of you, and we hope to see everybody down the road.